The Cindy Adams Show, 77 WABC.
I am about to speak to Jim Campbell. He's the author of the book that came out a few years ago called Madoff Talks. And one of the interview subjects in Madoff Talks, he interviews all of the players, the family, their associate. It's in over 400 pages. And as we speak now, it's a Netflix documentary. Okay, Jim, are you on the phone? Are you there?
Yes, Cindy, thanks for having me. It's a thrill. I read your column whenever it's on. The Post was great too. When the book came out, Steve Links, the editor, gave me 2 full pages at the front. Mackenzie Dawson put me in the Sunday book deal. And WABC's been great too. I was on Rita Cosby's show. So thanks for having me.
Okay, before we go into every single thing I want to know about Madoff, everything, tell us who you are. What is your background?
Yeah, Jim Campbell. I have syndicated radio shows, Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. It is a crime show. And what happened with the Madoff thing was fortuitous. I was interviewing someone, Laurie Sandell, who'd written a book that Andrew had cooperated with a bit. Ruth didn't like it, but he pressed her to cooperate. And before we come on the air, she says, do you want to talk to Andrew Madoff on background? I said, wow.
Yeah, sure.
Andy talks to me. By then, about that time, he's one of the most vilified people on the planet, and obviously hasn't been talking to anybody. He's being sued left and right. We were off the record. I started attacking him from the minute I got on the phone, and he couldn't have been nicer, more honest. And that led to the second coincidence. His mother, Ruth Madoff, happened to be moving to Greenwich, where I live in Connecticut, and we spent a ton of time together, having meals, texting, and she introduced me to Bernie in prison, and the rest is history.
Okay, how long after the arrest of Bernie Madoff did you start writing this?
Yeah, this was about 2011, I believe, that Bernie and I got in touch, and between then and the book coming out was over 10 years.
Did you have any prior white-collar crime knowledge or experience before?
Well, I've, my show is kind of investigative in nature, so I have done a lot of things. I had the biggest insider trading in the Ras Rajaratnam on. I had the first interview with Elliot Spitzer after he resigned from governor. I had Dennis Kozlowski, who was the Tyco CEO. He'd only done 60 Minutes before. So I've done a lot on the Russian oligarchs, et cetera. So I have had some, but getting, 400 pages with Bernie himself is really unbelievable.
Okay, we know what he is. We know he was a louse. We know all of the rest of it.
Yep.
What inspired you to write this particular book?
Well, when you get this much access to Bernie Madoff, which no one else had, I had to do something with it. And he's such an unfathomable mind. I mean, brilliant guy who built a business from scratch that was 100% legitimate, worth $3 billion at peak, and the biggest criminal enterprise on Wall Street at the exact same time over the same years. I mean, just imagine what that brain is like.
But did anybody get angry as a result of all the stuff that you discovered and you were writing about?
You mean victims and things getting mad at me or anything?
Either victims or family members or stuff that you revealed that nobody else had known before? Yeah.
Well, first off, let me tell you, it covers all of the failure of the regulatory side, the SEC and Wall Street. So J.P. Morgan was Bernie's bank. So I'm pretty tough on them in the book. And I know Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO, just called me this week after watching the documentary. In terms of safety, I'll give you an example. I was given all of Bernie's diaries and all of his phone numbers to all of his investors. And there's one over in Austria in particular who ran a feeder fund, which are these hedge funds that sent money to Bernie. And I was told if I called that number, I might get killed.
Oh, that's sort of nice. Tell me about the Jamie Dimon thing. I mean, what did he say? What did he want?
Interesting. Yes. He had watched the documentary, obviously, because he wanted to get across some points in defense of J.P. Morgan. And I hope I'm not revealing too much, but I had a lot more information just because of the depth of detail I'd been in. And within a few minutes, he actually started listening to me and asking me questions. I cannot say how impressed I was that this is a big CEO, probably along with Larry Fink of BlackRock, the two biggest finance guys in the world, that he listened. He listened to me. He didn't try and bark or dictate or get mad. The next day, I sent him an email apologizing for interrupting him. He said, no, it was a good conversation.
Bernie, Jim, what did he ask you, actually? What did he want to know that he didn't know? He
asked me about another bank that he'd heard rumors fraudulently treated the Madoff investors and the way they acted, and I took him through the whole story. Without telling you the bank, I will tell you this is pretty sordid stuff. Madoff never allowed any independent custodians. Normally, you keep the money separate from the money manager so you know it's really there. This big international bank was perceived to be the custodian of a feeder fund out of Austria, and so people thought that's where the money was. Well, under the table, this bank had delegated custodianship to a small bank they owned in the Cayman Islands, which in turn, under the table, delegated custodianship right back to Bernie Madoff.
Oy, this is very interesting. Did you speak to his wife?
Ruth Madoff? Oh, yeah, I spent a lot of time with her. I was really closest to her. I mean, Bernie and I, our relationship was question and answer back and forth. He grew to like me. He himself is a likable guy other than being a narcissistic liar. But Ruth gave me a lot of time. And, you know, she would pour out her heart because she lost both her sons. She started dating Bernie at 13. He gets a 150-year jail sentence. Everybody thinks she's evil and involved. Her sons were alienated from the beginning because she couldn't disconnect herself from Bernie. And here she is. She gave up $800 million. They left her with $2.5 million, and she did not complain about it to me. She just said, I came from Queens from nothing, and I don't need a lot of money, and I'm going to just go on. Okay, so you believe that she was innocent, completely innocent? I did my own. You got to remember that the DOJ, the Southern District of New York, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee, and the media and people all believe that Ruth, Mark, and Andrew were complicit. I did my own investigation in Chapter 8 of the book, and I come up with that none of the three of them knew about it or were complicit, which I had told CBS Sunday Morning when they interviewed me. Does that mean they shouldn't have known? Well, should the SEC have missed 5 separate investigations and the feeder funds who were putting in money and supposed to be doing due diligence? So they did not know, and they were not involved. But obviously, everybody has a moral fault for not getting the
Listen,
answers. When
I was married, I knew what my husband was doing and who he was doing it to. You can tell me that this lady never knew borscht? Is that what you're telling me?
Let me tell you something. I asked her, what's the first thing you said to Bernie when he broke down that night before December 11th in the Upper East Side apartments you had? She said her first question was, what's a Ponzi scheme? Now, she had an inkling something big was up about a day before because Madoff told her to withdraw $10 million, and she came into the office and was catatonic. But she did not know that it was a Ponzi scheme. And by the way, none of his big investors who were doing illegal stuff, they knew it was illegal, knew it was a Ponzi scheme specifically. The boys were completely devastated, and Mark, as you know, committed suicide 2 years to the day of the arrest.
So, listen, I can't understand what motivated Bernie to do what he did, actually.
That's a great question, particularly when he had a legitimate business and didn't even need to do it. And it was not greed, and it was not because he lost some money and he was acting like a gambler and trying to double down, for a small time with a Ponzi scheme and then get out of it, which, by the way, is the lie he told me. But the fact is he could not psychically accept losses. And his legitimate business was based on commissions. So you're making money when the market's up, when the market's down. He started off with about 20 investors, and he saw he could lose money. He couldn't deal with it. He couldn't accept it. So he stopped trading for real and faked it. He had to be the go-to guy. He had to be the guy that delivered. He could never say that he couldn't do something. And that's why he just kept on doing it. He couldn't get himself out of it. It's also why his family didn't know. He would have never, his ego would never have allowed him to say, I had to turn to criminal behavior to save the firm.
It isn't possible that you may be somewhat on the side of Madoff and we are not. Is that possible?
No. First off, my whole approach was to follow the truth. I was very lucky that Bernie and the family, they trusted me with their legacy, even though none of them knew me from dirt. But I don't care what I find. I just focus on the truth. I would have turned Ruth, Andrew, and Mark in. And by the way, my investigation on Mark and Andy, it was very close to the end, whether I could figure out whether they were guilty or not, because certain things didn't look good. So I called it as I see it, the same way that I like Jamie Dimon, but I had to call out what J.P. Morgan did. They missed an incredible amount. Bernie's, that little checking account that he ran his customers through, ran $170 billion through it. And in his strategy, which is a stock market-based strategy, there should have been payments to counterparties for trades, and there should have been dividends for stocks that they earned. Very, basic stuff. In all the 40 years, there was never a single dollar of a payment to a counterparty, and not a single dollar deposit of a dividend. There should have been $4 billion. So J.P. Morgan really should have been able to figure this thing out within 5 minutes of looking inside that account.
Anybody not talk to you?
Yes. Here's a surprising thing. You just heard me say how poorly J.P. Morgan did. Jamie Dimon allowed his people to talk on background to me, okay, with nothing to gain. The big winner, supposedly, is the Civic bankruptcy trustee. He is appointed to try to go in back and get money back for victims. They got $14 billion back out of the 19 that was the base investment, which is considered incredible. Except, how did they do that? They didn't really have any money in their customer fund like the FDIC does for banks. They went to Madoff investors who had taken out more than they put in and clawed back money that they may not even have had anymore, and they were innocent, and given it to Madoff victims who had left their money there. So I found that pretty sleazy, to be blunt. But in any event, you would think he would love to talk because he's telling this incredible story. And by the way, for doing that, he took $2 billion in fees, which is a rather massive number. He refused to talk to me 3 times, and he refused to talk to Netflix.
Did Madoff ever think he would be caught?
He was stunned that he wasn't caught. Let me give you one example he told me. It's a Friday night, and he's talking to the SEC who are examining him, and he says, I can prove to you that all my trades exist. There's something called the DTC, Depository Trust Company. It's where all the clearing is done on Wall Street, and every trade has to go through there before it settles. And his legitimate business, you could trace every single trade through there. So he says, here's my account number, 646. You call the DTC, and you ask for the sub-account on the investment advisory business, which is the Ponzi scheme, and you'll see every trade is there. He says, Jim, I'm expecting to be arrested over the weekend. There's no sub-account, and there was never a single trade that went through the DTC for that business, and the SEC never made the phone call.
So meantime, Jim, are you rich?
From Netflix, you mean, or from Bernie? I didn't get anywhere. No, I'm just joking on Bernie. The Netflix optioned my book, right? And then I consulted with them. I can't tell you enough. The director, Joe Berlinger, who's done stuff on Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Ted Bundy, Whitey Bulger, what a great human being and great director he is. He's #1 true crime director for Netflix. He treated me so well. He took my book seriously. It's a very complex story, and he told all the facts. He didn't try to Hollywoodize it. Okay.
I know all about how great you are and how great your Netflix is and how great your book is and how great everything is, and I'm glad that you spoke to me. You're a wonderful, wonderful writer. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, honey.
I love you. You're very nice, Cindy. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, honey. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Cindy Adams Show, 77 WABC.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
School for Startups Radio hopes you will reach out to us if you have any questions or comments, or if you need help with your business at any stage, from concepts to exit. Jim accepts all connections on LinkedIn. He tweets from @EntrepreneurJim, and he responds to emails at james.beach@att.net. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
We are back again. Thanks a lot for being with us. I don't know if you have been watching on Netflix. There is a new series out. I think it's a 4-parter on the Bernie Madoff guy, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time up until now. Maybe the new one, SBF, will surpass it. It doesn't look like it, but anyway, there's a record to go for. The man behind that is with us today. I'm excited to have Jim Campbell on the show. He is author of Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. It was turned into a Netflix series, as I said. Jim Campbell is also nationally syndicated. He's on 350 stations around the country, I believe. And so we're excited to welcome Jim. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Jim, it's my honor to be with you in Atlanta. Thanks for having me on.
It is our pleasure. All right. Tell us the untold truth. What's the scenes behind the scenes of the Madoff story?
Well, before getting to the Netflix adaptation, I always say, I put this like architecture around it, saying people think they know the entire Madoff story, and actually don't. That the fact that he was able to survive in a Ponzi scheme for 40 years is almost unfathomable. And the reason was he was enabled. And I quickly say I break it into what I call 4 co-conspirators. There's the big 4, which are these big investors that backed him and periodically funneled money when he needed it and was desperate. And it gave them the power to extort returns from him. Secondly, the willfully blind, and these were the feeder funds, hedge funds that funneled money to Bernie to manage. Now, their job is to do due diligence and match up the investor with the right risk profile. And instead, what Bernie did was he took the fees that he would have normally have earned, 2% of assets, 20% of gains. He passed them back to the feeder funds as essentially bribes, and in return, they could do no due diligence and ask no questions. Thirdly, the unwitting co-conspirators, and that's the SEC primarily, who did 5 separate investigations, never uncovered the Ponzi scheme. In fact, they kept reinvestigating him on charges that he was cleared of. And then finally, a small group on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Midtown, where his building was, behind locked keys. There were high school graduates, and they did all the operations without ever managing to figure out they were running a Ponzi scheme. So it's that untold story when it gets weaved together that really makes it so fascinating.
The big 4,
yes,
and these are named American investors that you talk about in the series.
Yes,
they seem very culpable to me. It's pretty clear that they knew that this was going on. Describe this and what happened to those people in the end, and describe the situation for the people who haven't seen the series and how they are knowingly operating.
These 4 gentlemen, Jeffrey Pickhauer was the biggest, and he took out $7 billion out of the fund over the period of time. Bernie himself only, in quotes, stole $800 million that he put into the back door of the legitimate business. Most people don't know. 2 floors above that 17th floor, he ran a fully legitimate market-making business that was worth $3 billion in and of itself. And anyway, he and the 3 other guys, they would funnel these cash and we needed it. And they would end up getting returns of 30, 40, 50% a year out of Bernie, which was coming out of the hide of his lower net worth investors. He did not have nothing but really rich folks. He had a lot of normal folks that put money in over 40 years. And that money was being used to what I call a reverse Robin Hood. Now, did they know it was a Ponzi scheme? They most likely did not know, because they would not have left their money with them. But they knew they were committing fraud. They knew the gains were fake. They also put in fake losses so they would offset the gains and not have to pay taxes with real money. And they took real money out of the fund all the time. So they knew they were engaged in criminal activities. And by the way, none of them went to jail. None of those feeder fund guys I just mentioned, who obviously knew that something was up as well, because they weren't allowed to ask any questions. And there were so many red flags coming out of Bernie's place that, it's kind of ridiculous.
So why did they do nothing for so long? Obviously they're getting the bribe, the 2% bribe or the 50% return, right? But still, they had to know that eventually at this level, the scam runs out, and one of these blindfold, willing conspirators ends up committing suicide. Right? I mean, this is...
Well, there's a fair amount of people that committed suicide, including one of Bernie's sons, who committed suicide 2 years to the exact day of his arrest. One of the feeder fund guys, what I call the willfully blind, a French nobleman, if you will, who had a lot of European aristocrats and even royalty in the money that he funneled to Bernie. He slashed his wrists at about 7 o'clock at night in his New York office. Great Thierry Magnum de la Vessier. I mean, this huge, beautiful French name, and very sad. He had total trust in Bernie. And obviously, once that level of betrayal and that he'd lost $2 billion of these European folks' money, he took his own life.
Do you think he had complete trust still?
I think he had complete trust in Bernie. Now, should he have had? He had a risk manager who suspected that something wasn't right. And, and if you watch the Netflix or read the book, there are these whistleblowers, Harry Markopoulos and Frank Casey. Both of them, Frank talked to Terry, and within minutes, what Terry was describing, he knew could not be done in the equity markets. And then, of course, Harry Markopoulos re-engineered it on a spreadsheet in under 2 hours and proved that Bernie's returns were too good to be true.
Yes. And what about the sons? Or anyone really on the 19th floor? It seems to me that anyone on the 19th floor should eventually have said, okay, we're not allowed down there.
Yes.
Those are not sophisticated people down there. That adds up to something fishy. I mean, don't you think everyone on the 19th floor should have been smart enough? I mean, these are people making $2-3 million a year as traders of that $3 billion legitimate business that you mentioned.
Yeah. It's a question that transcends all of this. As Bernie himself said to me, well, if my sons didn't know or were supposed to know, why did the SEC not know? And they were actually doing investigations. And the fact is that he did not allow the sons to go down there. And it's certainly, you would have racked your mind to say, why weren't they, doing everything they possibly could? But if you get to understand Bernie and the way that he was able to chop people off at the knees and the way he kept his sons under control, I mean, a sad part of this is that business on the 19th floor at one time was completely legitimate and highly ethical. He would not tolerate even small little violations, and he would self-report if he had to the SEC. Those boys' job was to be at what I call the front of the restaurant, making it look perfectly clean, while the back, where the mob hangs out, or in this case downstairs, is dirty. And they did not know. Now, I did my own investigation in my book in Chapter 8, because remember, at the time, the Justice Department, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee, and the media all thought the boys at Ruth had to know. So I did my own investigation, and it was touch and go right till the end, because that $800 million I told you about that Bernie took, he funneled that in the back door of the 19th floor through the trading P&Ls to hide those gains. And the fact is, the folks that ran the trading desk, the proprietary desk, which was his own capital, and then the market making for customers, were run by the sons. So that doesn't look good at all. But I was able to see under the hood that the sons never saw the P&Ls that were manipulated at the level where this money was hidden. That what they saw was the actual trading results, and then back in the chief financial officers, with really only about 3 of them in total, did the fudging. So, in the end, you can't excuse the SEC, you can't excuse the feeder funds, the Big Four, or the Sons, but none of them figured it out. He was brilliant at manipulation, he was brilliant at bullying, and he was brilliant at bribing, because he did all 3 parts of that. He either paid you, or he bullied you, or he controlled you. And, in the end, the Sons were betrayed like Thierry, the French guy I just told you about. They worshipped him. They thought he was, that he walked on water.
Yes. And then the other son, one committed suicide and the other son died of cancer. So sad. How's Ruth doing these days?
Yeah. Andy was the son that died of cancer in 2014. And he told me that, my father killed my brother right away, and he killed me slowly. Now, Ruth and I, we had a relationship, pretty close relationship. The coincidence was she was moving to my hometown here in Greenwich, Connecticut from Florida, and that's when Andrew introduced me to her. And so we had a relationship that involved having lunches every, couple of months, and then texting primarily. And she grew to totally trust me, and I grew to, she'd lost $800 million. The government had left her with $2.5 million, of which about 500,000 of that went to lawyers. And she wasn't complaining about her life at all and the way that it had been circumscribed and the total shame that her husband brought on her. And again, this was another thing. She had cult-like devotion to him. She had been with him. She was 13 years old dating. And to break through that was what was really brutal. By the time I came along, she was most of the way through breaking herself off from him, but she could never let go of him totally. And of course, she's the one that introduced me to him, where I ended up with this long, 400-page relationship. Now, where is she now? After the book was signed and it was about ready to come out, she didn't want to talk anymore. And I think primarily because they were trying to get Bernie released on early release because of his health. And so I haven't talked to her since then. I do know that she did I signed a book for her, which her lawyer gave her. And she doesn't look at all like she looked, very pretty. She stopped dyeing her hair, so you might not even recognize her if you ran into her.
Well, that probably her intent, I would have to imagine.
She was definitely, she hated, she used to wander around. Old Greenwich is where the beach is here, a big town beach, and she used to wander around there. People jog and walk, and she used to hate people looking at her. She told me even when they smiled and were friendly, she did not like it. The first time we met in a restaurant in Old Greenwich. She came in, and it was around just before noon in a cold December day. There was not a single person in the restaurant, and she didn't take off her sunglasses for like 20 minutes. And then when we walked, and we hit it off. She was great chemistry. And as we walked out, I said, "Can I get a picture of us?" And she says, "You're wired, aren't you?" She thought I'd set her up. So, so she was obviously, so paranoid by the time this all happened.
And what was his time in prison like?
What was his time in prison like?
Yes.
Well, first thing, Bernie and our communications were by prison email system and handwritten letters and then emails because the prison warden vetoed me visiting as a security risk. So I didn't get to see him up front. They turned us down about 3 times. So, but what comes across is just these long letters of self-justification. What he cared about was his reputation, and that Jim, this strategy that everybody laughs at and says is fake. No, it works. It worked. He would take me through all the technical steps and everything, and then he would say, "Well, now, of course, I wasn't doing any real trading." I mean, in other words, almost delusional. And then he would say, on remorse, he would say, "Well, Jim, my lawyers tell me I have to show remorse," which is probably not a good way to say you're showing remorse. And then within a minute or two, he'd be back. These people were greedy. I was their victim. They wanted returns under any circumstances. I had to always deliver the pressure. They were greedy. If they didn't have enough money, they shouldn't have gone in. If they didn't know they were undiversified, that's their fault. And it was always this kind of narcissistic behavior where they're the persecuted victim and they take ultimately no responsibility. And that was Bernie. Brilliant guy. He had a low-key charisma, tremendous recall, and then a pathological liar.
Right. But did he suffer? Was his prison time? I heard that he was complaining that he was going through too much, that it was too bad.
I think, first off, when he turned himself in and then he got the prison sentence, I think that part was a relief, that the stress of keeping this thing going had gotten to be so overwhelmingly intense. So I think from that side, then I think when he got there, he's a guy that adapts himself. He likes to control and stuff. I think he had a lot of respect there because A, he was so smart, and he was even tutoring folks if they wanted to on finance, and B, he got away with this big thing, So I don't think he had it so tough. He was in the medical wing then for a long time, and at the end he was suffering brutally health-wise.
Right. Well, no one wants that for anybody. Well, a lot of people did want that for him. So,
yeah, in his case.
Do you see any similarities with perhaps the crypto case that we have now? Does it compare the Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I was struck by some similarities. First off, they both built reputations of trust. And in Bernie's case, it was largely a Jewish affinity crime, 85% of the victims and charities. And he had, such high trust, they called him the Jewish T-bill, secures the government bond. And he had great trust with the regulators. I mean, because if the market making firm was well run, and they would often go to him to say, we don't understand what Goldman Sachs is doing here. Can you explain it? And then, of course, he had all those investigations where they didn't find anything. SBF, if you look at him, he spent $73 million on political campaign contributions. He had celebrity endorsers. He had ex-regulators that were consulting for him, like from the CFTC, which oversees crypto, to the extent that nothing really oversees crypto. And he had this altruism philosophy. So they had this, and in the crypto world, that was strange because most crypto guys were just totally anti, they were totally populist, anti-government, anti-regulation. But he appeared to play the game, which is what he was doing. The second thing I noticed, we just talked about Bernie's lack of remorse. Here's a guy, he vaporizes a $32 billion market value exchange, including commingling $8 billion of customer money with his affiliated Alameda Research, which, by the way, was the number one crime Bernie committed, obviously, was commingling client money with firm money. But you don't get a sense where. I want to hear, where's the remorse? What I heard basically out of SBF is the dog ate my homework. I don't know how it happened. Didn't have any controls. I didn't know the other firm was doing all this stuff, even though he owned 90% of it. And then this dog, by the way, had to be pretty smart because they were doing stuff under the table, according to allegations, manipulating the FTT token. He had $1.3 billion in loans to himself personally off of customer money that they programmed their system not to charge him interest on. Okay, so he's stealing money, not paying interest on it, and claiming his dog ate his homework. You put that together. There were tons of red flags. No independent custodians, which is, the fundamental issue with Bernie. He was taking customer money, and the way it should be in a hedge fund is a custodian should hold that money separately from the money manager. That way it's there. Bernie wouldn't allow that. Well, this exchange, everything was mixed up. It was commingled. They were borrowing money at Alameda, essentially taking customer Bitcoin currency to use it as a collateral to make illiquid investments, which is crazy, to make illiquid investments with a highly volatile currency, if you will, which tells you why they had to keep that currency stable, the FTT token. So I come up with this guy's going to do a long prison sentence.
Okay. Long as in 20 years, 30 years?
I think long is in one of two things. If he takes a plea, right now, remember, he's pleading innocent, which is his right. If he takes a plea and they go to court, he will have a huge sentence, 50 years, 100 years. If he takes a plea, it might get down to that 20-year range.
Wow. Oh, and he's young too. So.
And he's young. I don't know if he can wear shorts in prison, but he's going to have to take responsibility. Now, remember, my analysis is based on these allegations filed by the government. Okay, if the dog really did eat his homework and he had no criminal intent, and this is, it's hard to buy. And by the way, he still should have had criminal negligence, and he still should be having real remorse. And maybe he does have real remorse, but it doesn't sound like he's ultimately taking responsibility.
Well, I mean, someone had to be responsible, if not him. His two closest, the girlfriend CEO is already confessed, and I don't remember the first name, but I think the last name is Wang, who was the COO or something.
He was a co-founder and co-chair. He's also confessed, but also, I mean, come on, common sense judgment. You're running an exchange and you have an investment vehicle that you totally own. You take customer money to bring it over there to let yourself do trading. That is not only completely unethical and illegal, but it's totally wrong. You can't run an exchange in conflict with a private business that you're running that's making risky investments backed by customer money that are supposed to be untouched. So it doesn't smell good no matter any way that you look at it. And then the arrogance of going on the media and, after this has all come out and talking left and right as if, literally the dog eats the homework. I'm over here still being the good guy. It's just a tremendous amount of arrogance.
Right. What do you think of the younger generations, Jim? The 25-year-olds to 35-year-olds? Yeah.
You know what I think? I think they succumb to magical thinking when you have something like this, that this currency, crypto, it has no regulations. It has no store of value like the dollar. The dark web, 70% of the transactions on the dark web are criminally related, and most of those transactions are done in Bitcoin. Okay, so there's a lot of dirty economics going on. Now, what I mean by magical thinking is you take the mindset, and some of it's understandable. The government has let people down now for a long time. It's hard to trust. There's a real sense of anti-government. Technology is trusted more. This is decentralized finance, and it meets all the populistic criteria of the young. Plus, they understand it. They're used to dealing in digital relationships, digital assets. So then you add the magic thinking to it. Well, this thing is just going to go through the sky. It's going to, there's no risk, reward, risk. There's no trade-off. And it's sort of magical thinking, So it's going to be too good. It's going to be, you got to just hold this, and it's going to go up and down. But there's nothing behind it. And there's no regulation behind it. And it's facilitating a lot of dirty stuff. And you know what? When these kinds of things, the bubbles always burst. And the FTT token that SBF had is down 96% from what was, supposed to be rather stable. Even the stable coins have all collapsed. So, and I think, this generation is totally committed to technology. So I think they'll stick with it. And hopefully it'll become a legitimate currency. I personally think the value is as an infrastructure technology and blockchain to run, transactions and things like that, not as a currency, and certainly not as a currency with nothing backing it up and criminal activity involved in it throughout.
And do the strong of the currencies survive, or does this start to bring down the entire market?
The entire crypto market?
Yes.
Well, if you look at the stable coins, have shown that they're not stable, and they were supposed to be backed by some store of value, such as treasuries or something that they could be pegged to, similar to what a dollar was, and that is already seen to have already gone down. Because what you have here, Jim, is a confidence game. okay, which is, con is short. If there is confidence in this currency, it will be doing all right. The minute there's no confidence, it crashes. And unfortunately, because there's no store of value, and unfortunately, that's what you've seen. I think the crypto value is down like $2 trillion in the last year or so. Do I think there'll ever be a cryptocurrency? Yeah, there could be once there's regulation, it's cleaned up, and there's something behind it, but not the too good to be true version. And the technology, though, blockchain should survive because there's a function for it.
Right. Well, of course, I mean, it's not threatened. The idea of blockchain being used in any other industry is not being threatened. IBM is on the show all the time talking about the incredible things they're doing with blockchain and being able to track my asparagus back to the water that was used on it.
Yeah. Well, not only that,
cool.
You can break the monopoly of the credit card companies. They have the monopoly on transactions, right? You have to go through their network, and they get to charge you anywhere from, under a penny percent to maybe 3 or 4% at American Express. Blockchain theoretically should be able to do that same function for almost nothing, right? And, so there's definite real uses of it.
That's a great example. Jim, how do you want us to find out more? Follow you online, watch you on Netflix, get a copy of the book, all of the above.
Great. Thank you. The book, Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, is from McGraw-Hill, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and your local bookstores. The Netflix docuseries is 4 parts, 1 hour each. It's airing right now, and I think you'll really enjoy it. JimCampbellRadio.com gets you to my podcast, at least. And Jim, it's been my honor to be on. Very good questions.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And hope you'll come back and we'll talk about you next time. How about that?
Anytime, Jim. Thanks a lot. Take care.